micoud44 here, and welcome back to another video. I mean, like, seriously, like, you know, I took a break a little. So, it's like I used to do it every Thursday because my aunt doesn't know. And, you know, I kind of don't want to know. I don't know why, I just kind of don't. So, today we're going to do 10 people famous for doing things they didn't do. Stories of the great inventors and innovators of previous generations have been passed down through the ages. People love to hear a good tale, and the best ones always feature the most brilliant, incredible person doing something inconceivably great or victorious. Whether it involves discovering a new part of the world, inventing a new technology, or making a rebellious statement in the face of injustice, our heroes are always the infallible best that their generations have to offer. But we so often believe. In actuality, many of these great stories are subject to changes and embellishments over the years. By the time we hear them in the modern day, they are either full of misconceptions or even downright false. Number 10. Pythagoras did not discover the Pythagorean theorem. Another who has even ever taken geometry class has probably had the Pythagorean theorem drilled into their memory. I lost it. This theorem states that for any right-angled triangle, the square of the hypotenuse, the longest side, is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. It is a valuable tool used for bridge building, construction, or even just determining the distance between 2 points. Yet this well-known theorem was not actually discovered by the famous philosopher after which it was named. Born circa 569 BC, Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician, but most of what is known about him was recorded by historians who lived hundreds of years after he died. Although he is believed to be the first mathematician, his actual contributions to the field of mathematics are largely unknown. He is thought to have founded a school, the semicircle of Pythagoras, that walked the fence between science and religion. It is focused on intellectual pursuits as well as an understanding of the divine meaning behind numbers. The school practiced collectivism, meaning any discoveries made by any member were attributed to Pythagoras, possibly including the Pythagorean theorem. Furthermore, a clay tablet originating from the old Babylonian period shows that the Babylonians already knew the mathematical relationship between the diagonal of a square and its sides, a special case of the Pythagorean theorem. Somewhere between 1800 BC and 1600 BC, this was over 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. Number 9. Michael Jackson did not invent the moonwalk. While performing his famous hit, Billie Jean, for the Motown 25th anniversary live show in 1983, the King of Pop performed what would forever be his signature dance move, the moonwalk. This famous move, in which the dancer appears to be walking forward while simultaneously gliding backward, became associated with Michael Jackson from that day forward. Although Jackson certainly made this move famous, he did not invent it. Performers had been using it in their acts for many years prior. Originally known as the Black Side, this move was previously used by African-American top dancer Bill Bailey in his dance act way back in the 1950s. Famous mimes including Marceau also used the move in their routines, and stars like James Brown and Bill Robinson did it years before Jackson. In fact, Jackson had learned it from two young dancers, Casper Candidate and Cooley Jackson, Jackson, who had performed the move in their Beluga act featured on Soul Train back in the 1970s. Although the King of Pop certainly deserves recognition for bringing the moonwalk to the masses, this iconic move was first performed long before Jackson was even a twinkle in his winked father's eye. Number 8. Alexander Fleming was not the first person to discover the antibiotic properties of mold. As an antibiotic resistant rears its head in our modern society and makes even seemingly small bacterial infections deadly, we should take a moment to acknowledge how our antibiotic journey began. As the story goes, the first antibiotic was discovered accidentally in 1928 by Sir Alexander Fleming, a scientist who was studying the influenza virus at the time. Sir Fleming noticed the plate of Staphylococcus bacteria he had been growing had been contaminated by mold, and that mold had left a circle around it in which no bacteria would grow. In later tests, he diluted the mold culture 800 times and found that it was still an effective antibacterial agent. Naming the active substance penicillin after the mold from which it was derived, penicillum, Sir Fleming's discovery prevented an uncountable number of deaths in the years to come. While Sir Fleming's incredible work should never be discredited, there is another lesser-known scientist who researched the antibacterial properties of mold years earlier. Vincenzo Tibero was an Italian scientist born in 1869 in Sapino. While studying medicine in Naples, Tibero lived in an old house that relied on a well for water. He noticed that whenever the well was cleaned to remove the mold on the inner walls, the people who drank from the well suffered from intestinal maladies that did not stop until the mold had regrown. After some further research, Tibero concluded that certain molds, including penicillin, had antibacterial effects. However, his discovery was disregarded as coincidence by the scientific world and was essentially ignored. Number 7, this one may come to no surprise. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. Thomas Edison is a well-known inventor, but among other inventions of his time, he was probably better known for the massive number of patents he owned. 1,093 to be exact. That's a lot of money he'd be earning. Sorry. Okay. Edison is known to have been a creator, not only of innovative technologies, but also of myths surrounding himself. He often boasted that he could get by on only 3 hours of sleep a night, and that he never had a formal education, both of which were proven to be exaggerated claims. Arguably, the best-known myth surrounding Edison is that he invented the light bulb. In 1800, Italian inventor Alessandro Volta developed the voltaic pile, a contraption consisting of alternating discs of copper and zinc, interspersed with cardboard soaked in salty water. The voltaic pile conducted electricity when copper wire was attached to at either end, and the wire began to glow. In 1802, Humphrey Davy found a way to connect voltaic piles and charcoal electrodes, producing the first electric lamp. Dave's lamp was imperfect. It was overly bright and burned out quickly. Years later, in 1840, Warren D. LaRue developed a more efficient light bulb using colored platinum, but the price of platinum made it costly. English chemist Joseph Swan improved the design in 1860 by using much cheaper carbonized paper filaments in place of the platinum coils. In 1879, Edison finally entered the fray, replacing the filament in Swan's bulb with a filament of high electrical resistance. Edison's bulb was the most effective and cost-efficient at the time, but it certainly was not the first to exist and not his original idea. If anything, the light bulbs we so rely on today arose from massive group effort spanning many years. They were not the work of any one man or woman. Number 6. Christopher Columbus did not discover that the Earth was round. Or America. To this day, a belief persists that Christopher Columbus bravely sailed west on his journey to Asia, fearlessly risking falling off the side of the map to prove that the Earth was round and not a finite plane. But this is not true. Although Columbus set sail in the 1490s, people had already known the Earth was round since 600 BC, thanks to the work of Aristotle and other scientists of that time. The myth surrounding Columbus originates from a book written in 1828 by another author, Washington Irving. He added some artistic license to his retelling of Columbus's journey. Irving claimed that Columbus was called a fool and had his faith questioned by Catholic geographers who thought that his idea of a round Earth was preposterous. In reality, the challenges faced by Columbus had nothing to do with the shape of the Earth. Instead, its circumference was the problem. Columbus believed that the circumference of Earth was small enough that he could sail west instead of east to reach Asia and establish a new trade route. It must have been quite a shock when he instead discovered the Americas, at least for the Europeans. Indigenous people have already lived there for thousands of years, and he still didn't discover it. You can't discover something if people are already there. Number 5. Eve did not eat an apple in the book of Genesis. As the famous Bible story goes, the first sin committed by humans came in the form of Eve disobeying God and eating an apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But did she really? From arguably one of the most famous Bible stories, one common misconception seems to be prevalent in most versions of the story that exists outside of the Bible verse. That is, the belief that the forbidden fruit was an apple. Apples are never actually mentioned in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis 1:27-29, and I hope I don't offend anyone while reading this, God tells Adam and Eve that they can eat any fruit that has seeds, which includes apples. The forbidden fruit that Eve eats is never described in detail, though the misconception of it being an apple may arise from a mistranslation. The Vulgate or Latin translation of the Bible uses the word mali for evil when describing the tree. The word for apple is very similar sounding, mala. Whatever the case, it seems that the only true bad apple in the book of Genesis was Eve's future son, Cain, who was going to murder his brother over some vegetables. But that's a story for a different list. Yeah. Number 4. George Washington did not chop down a cherry tree. George Washington is often portrayed as a man of great virtue and valor, and for very good reasons. In short, he was such a man. Washington was not only the commander of the Continental Army who brought his country to victory in the American Revolution, but also served as the first president of the United States. He worked tirelessly to establish the new independent country after it was freed from British rule, as well as to innate religious freedom for all Americans. He was a remarkable man for sure, but for some authors, his life story still needed just a little more pizzazz. After Washington died in 1799, Mason Locke Weems, one of his first biographers, decided that the story of Washington's life needed some enhancements. To paraphrase Weems, he believed that Washington's biography should show that his rise to the top was a result of virtuous nature. To this day, little is known about Washington's childhood, but the tale created by Weems to show young Washington propensity for honesty still lives on. In the story, 6-year-old George receives a new hatchet, which he promptly uses as on one of his father's cherry trees. When his father discovers the damage, he confronts his son, only to have George bravely admit what he did without hesitation because he cannot tell a lie. Although ironically a lie about the importance of honesty. This cherry tree myth had been passed down for so many generations that it is still widely featured in political cartoons and the like. Number 3. Julius Caesar was never the Empire of Rome. An affair with Cleopatra, a secret love child, and a run-in with pirates who tried to ransom him for far less than he believed he was worth. No one can claim that Julius Caesar did not lead a full and exciting life. Still, even the once great leader of Rome has fallen victim to some widely believed misconceptions over the years. Gaius Julius Caesar, more commonly known as Julius Caesar, was born during a time of instability in the Roman Republic. After losing his father as a young man, Caesar quickly drew the ire of the Roman dictator Sulla. He posed enough of a threat to Caesar's life that Caesar joined the military to try to avoid death. By the time he turned 31, Caesar had fought in multiple wars and started to involve himself in politics. Eventually, he worked his way up the ladder to become dictator of the Roman Empire. He was a legendary general, a master of politics, and a champion for the lower-class citizens of Rome. But there is one title that Caesar never earned in his lifetime: Emperor. While often credited incorrectly as the first Roman Emperor, Caesar was never an emperor at all. The year before his death, Caesar declared himself dictator for life, a position that did not sit well with everyone. Members of the Roman Senate reacted poorly, thinking that Caesar was building himself up to eventually become king. Romans had no desire for a monarch, having lived without one for estimated 5 centuries by the time Caesar came along. He was assassinated on the Ides of March, on March 15th, to prevent his ascension to that position. succession. Julius' adopted son, Gabius Octavius Thurinus, better known as Augustus, took over his adopted father's position after Julius' murder. Eventually, Augustus became the first emperor of Rome, although he never actually used the title himself, et tu Augustus. Number 2. Hamlet was not an original idea from William Shakespeare. The melancholy tragedy of Hamlet is arguably one of the best-known works by William Shakespeare, but it may surprise you to know that he did not invent the plot himself. Shakespeare's Hamlet was heavily influenced by the Norse legend written by Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus. I don't forget. In fact, the name of Grammaticus' protagonist, Hamlet, is an anagram of Hamlet. However, whether that was an intentional or mistake made in translation is unclear. In both Hamlet and the story of Hamlet, there exists an uncle who murders the king, takes a throne, marries his brother's widow, and plots to kill his nephew, who pretends to be mentally unstable to avoid his uncle's wrath. The uncles in both stories try to target their nephew first by using a woman to lure him, then by planting a spy on him, and finally employing 2 escorts to take the prince to England to be killed there. At the end of both stories, the uncle is killed by his nephews as revenge, though Hamlet survives and Hamlet dies in their respective works. Clearly, the similarities between the stories are more than coincidence. It is also a possibility that Shakespeare did not base his plot on Grammaticus' work directly, but rather on another play called The Your Hamlet. Written by Thomas Kidd, The Your Hamlet was known to be heavily based on Grammaticus' legend of Hamlet. No surviving copy of The Your Hamlet exists to compare to Shakespeare's work. All that is known about this play is that it was a tragedy. It contained a character named Hamlet and had a ghost who spoke to Hamlet about revenge. All this exists in Shakespeare's work as well. Adapting the story or being influenced by another author is not unheard of or even uncommon, and Shakespeare is responsible for making the tale of Hamlet so famous. Still, credit for the plot behind this story should be given where it is due, and that appears to be Grammaticus. I hope I said that right. And number 1, the moment you've all been waiting for, number 1. Joseph Ignace Guillotine did not invent the guillotine. Guillotine and the guillotines were as misleading as the name may be. French doctor Joseph Ignace Guillotine did not invent the guillotine. Ironically, he was a strong opponent of capital punishment. In 1789, with state executions in France mostly consisting of gory acts, beheadings, or hanging deaths, Guillotine proposed to the French National Assembly that a more human method of killing be adopted. This call was answered by Surgeon Antoine Louis. He drafted the first design of the killing machine based on the similar ones that existed in Scotland and Italy. The first prototype was then created by German named Tobias Schmidt and was put to use in future executions. Though guillotine played no role in its design or construction, the instrument of death became known as the guillotine after Joseph's surname due to his staunch defense of humane capital punishment. Had it gone any other way, however, this infamous device may have become known as Louis or Schmidt, neither of which have quite the same ring to them. Yeah, guillotine's way better. Well, anyway, dudes, I want to thank you all for watching. Again, I'm sorry for this being a long video. You know, it's really long.